Good afternoon and welcome back to Asia Briefing Live 2021. My name is Lena Duchene. I'm a program manager here at Asia Society Australia and lead of this year's Asia Briefing Live forum. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that many participants in today's event are dialing in from locations that have traditional owners and custodians. I'm currently on Gadigal land of the Aryan Nation, and I pay my respect to their elders past, present, and emerging. We thank them for allowing us to meet and learn together on their territory. I also encourage you to watch our full Welcome to Country, beautifully delivered earlier today. So throughout this forum, we discussed the socio-economic and the political consequences of the ongoing pandemic, and we explored ways to recover from this unprecedented global crisis. In keeping with the forum's theme, Rethink, Recovery, and Renewal, this session will look at the gendered impact of the COVID crisis. So if you've been a member or follower of Asia Society Australia for a while, you may think that gender is not really our area of expertise. But really, women and girls are at the center of all the current disruptions to Asian economies and societies. So it's really important that we talk about it today and that we have a space to talk about it. Also make sure that you stay until the very end of the session for a very special announcement. You probably heard it before, but the pandemic has increased existing gender inequalities in the region. We know that women have experienced higher job losses. The burden of unpaid work during lockdowns also fell disproportionately on women, and gender-based violence is also at an all-time high. Pre-COVID, the Asia-Pacific region already had declining female labor force participation, and women performed 4 times more unpaid work than men. So the pandemic really accelerated these trends. But I want to make it clear that women are not only victims of the pandemic. They actually played and are playing an important role in responding to the virus. And so maybe this pandemic is an opportunity to build back better. The pandemic has brought to light the many issues still existing in the gender space. And so I hope that it will give a voice to the advocates and the policymakers trying to solve these issues. Today, we give voice to 2 such people. I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker. First, we have Julianne Cowley, is the Australian Consul-General in Ho Chi Minh City. And this year, she's been awarded both the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade Secretary's Award for Gender and for Reconciliation. So congratulations for this great achievement, and thanks again for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Nasrine Ghozali is Chief Risk Officer at Oasis, and she's joining today from Hong Kong. Nasrine co-founded the Board Diversity Hong Kong Investors Initiative, which she'll talk about today, and she's also a member of the 30% Club in Hong Kong and Japan chapter. I do recommend that you read Julianne and Nasrine's full bios by clicking on the menu on the left-hand side of your screen. It's a pleasure to have both of you here today. And we have a lot to cover today, so let's jump right in with maybe the most obvious question for this panel. In what ways have women been affected most adversely by the pandemic, and what do you think is the main challenge for recovery from a gender point of view? And Julianne, I'd like to ask you this question, if that's all right.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here to be part of this conversation, because I think, as you so aptly said in your beginning, Lena, it is a pandemic that has impacted everyone, but disproportionately the negative impacts have been felt by women. And that's because of a number of reasons. I mean, I think it's simple to look at healthcare sector. It's nurses, 80% women, but more broadly, even in other healthcare roles, 64% of those are held by women as well. And then if you have a look at other sectors that have been impacted and hit the hardest, it is things like retail and hospitality, and certainly here in Vietnam, garment manufacturing. And these are, again, all sectors that are predominantly female-based. So that's some of the kind of early economic impacts that we're seeing. And you mentioned the unpaid burden, the burden of unpaid care. I think that is huge. It was something that was an inequality before the pandemic, and it's been exacerbated by it. I hadn't factored in that I would be homeschooling myself 4 months last year, and my children haven't been outside the apartment since April this year, so we're doing it again. But certainly for households around the region, you know, the global closures of education, of schooling, that burden has fallen to women as well. Global closures have also meant global lockdowns, and as you said, gender-based violence. It was something that already had horrific rates. It's an insidious evil. I think we can't talk about this without talking about the fact that the rates of violence have increased, and they've increased in lockdowns. Already we knew in Southeast Asia that it was around 40% of women have experienced violence at the hand of an intimate partner, and that's across the lifetime. But, you know, we have now UNFPA conservatively estimating that that's increased by 20% because of the lockdowns. So, you know, that is across all of our societies. It is something that we absolutely must acknowledge and talk about. And then I think there's some other impacts as well, you know, which we may not automatically think about, but disruption to global supply chains has also meant that women haven't been able to access their reproductive health and contraceptives as easily. And so we have institutions like the Gates Foundation now estimating that we may have up to 15 million unplanned pregnancies coming out of this, which is, again, a huge and long-term impact. We're going to see the impact of women and girls dropping out of school and dropping out of the workforce as this continues. So there's certainly huge challenges. I think when we're starting to talk about recovery, though, there's a couple of key things to point to. One, certainly across some sectors, certainly not all, but some, we have proven to ourselves that some jobs can be done flexibly. We need to maintain that because it will benefit women. And most importantly, and this can't be stressed enough, women need to be at the table for decision making and for the leadership roles that are there when we're talking about how to build these economies back to recover from COVID. And that's a really critical thing, I think, on the decision making front, that we hear the women's voices.
No, absolutely. Thank you for this. And actually, it's a great segue to my next question. Because according to the UN, they were saying that to address the gender impacts of the pandemic, including women in decision-making is really the first thing. And then the second would be transforming the inequalities of unpaid work and creating a more inclusive economy. And then the third is to design socioeconomic plans with an intentional focus on the future of women and girls. So yeah, you mentioned having women at the table. And so this brings me to my next question, because we know that gender diversity is important for decision-making. So Nasrine, how much are women represented at the top tier of leadership in Hong Kong? And can you tell us about the work that you do with the Board Diversity Hong Kong Investors Initiative? So why you found it, and why is it so important?
Sure. Hi, Lena. Hi, Julianne. Thank you for having me for that great and important conversation. So as you said, Julianne, we know that gender diversity, in fact, diversity in general, is important for decision making, and that board diversity encourages better leadership, better governance, and ultimately increases corporate performance and global competitiveness for both companies and us, their shareholder. So let's look at Hong Kong. 10 years ago, in 2011, 10.5% of directors on Hong Kong listed company boards were women. Hong Kong had at that time one of the best number in the Asia Pacific region, very close to Australia at 10.9% for the ASX 200. So very similar numbers. However, over the past decade, progress in increasing board gender diversity on Hong Kong listed companies has been glacial, whether judged by isolation or by reference to other jurisdictions. Hong Kong used to lead in Asia, but now lags regionally and globally. So the numbers for January 2020, in Hong Kong, we had 13.7% of women on HSI boards, the main index. In July 2021, it's 14.3%. So we have less than 4% improvement over a decade. At the same time, in Australia, as of January 2020, the ASX 200 has 30% female representation on boards. So we see the massive difference between Hong Kong and Australia here. In fact, the city trails well behind London and New York, the global financial hubs to which it aspires to benchmark itself, and the gap keeps widening. Last year in the UK, the percentage of female on boards was 34.3%, and it was 28.2% in the US. In the rest of Asia, we have many countries doing better than Hong Kong. Malaysia at 25.8%, for instance, Singapore 17.6%, India at 17.2%, and even Japan is probably better than Hong Kong, with 14% last year after a huge increase in 2020 of over 5% for a year. So this lack of progress happened when at the same time, the Hong Kong stock market has been the largest fundraising venue worldwide for 7 years out of the past 11 years. So that's the situation for the boards. If we look at the statistics for senior management using BoardX 2020 Global Gender Diversity Analysis, Hong Kong is doing a little bit less worse. For female leadership teams, Hong Kong is ranked 17 out of 27 countries, whereas for the board, it ranks 25th out of 27 countries. So regarding the Hong Kong Board Diversity Investor Initiative, why did we found it? How will having more women on boards help the COVID recovery? Well, in 3 words, I would say performance, performance, performance. If we agree that diversity, including gender diversity, provides value to company, improved board effectiveness, enhanced business performance, we have to ask ourselves if Hong Kong can afford to be so slow in moving the needle on this issue, especially given its standing as a global financial center. Us as shareholder, we want to contribute. We believe diversity is paramount for decision making, so we want to promote diversity and engage directly with our investing companies to improve diversity. We want to encourage them to commit to better gender diversity at all levels of the organization, starting from the board of directors. We want to hold them accountable on all matters related to diversity and gender representation. We know that diversity of views improves decision making. It is even more important today during the COVID-19 crisis in these uncertain and challenging times to ensure that companies take the best decision and thrive.
Great, thank you so much. It's so interesting to have those figures, and I'm really surprised actually. I would have thought that Hong Kong was doing better. And I also would have thought that Vietnam was not doing so well. And that's completely ignorant from me, because looking at the figures, Vietnam has actually made some progress in improving women's economic empowerment in recent years. And I was looking at the region, and Vietnam is actually one of the only countries in the region to provide workplace child care. So yeah, I thought that was very interesting. And promoting women's economic empowerment is also a key part of Australia's development program in Vietnam. So maybe, Julianne, could you tell us a bit more about the Invest in Women initiative, and how do you think that it will support inclusive growth in Southeast Asia?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm always pleased to be able to talk about investing in women. As you said, it's the Australian government's flagship investment in gender, and it's across the 4 countries in the region. So it's in Indonesia, the Philippines, Myanmar, and here in Vietnam. And it's quite a substantial program, started in 2016, running across the 4 countries. It has 3 key pillars to it. And so the first is around working for gender equality in businesses. In the 4 countries, Investing in Women has set up business coalitions. So here in Vietnam, it is the VBCW, the Vietnam Business Coalition for Women's Empowerment. And it's inviting companies to come together and to look at their own gender practices and to see how equal their policies and their practices are and how they can improve that. I love this part of the program in particular because to me, it just makes absolute sense. It is CEOs consciously deciding that they will make sure that they're getting 100% out of their investment in their resources, that they have men and women in their organisations, they invest in bringing them in and training them. Why would you not look at all of your settings and make sure that your investment in those resources both perform at the same levels, because the settings enable them to and there's no barriers. So we've got a lot of leading companies that are doing that. And I think one of the exciting things about this part of the program too is that even in COVID times, we've seen businesses join those business coalitions. So it's no longer a thing that businesses are doing because it's nice to do or the right thing to do, it's profitable to do. And here in Vietnam, of the 17 companies that are part of that VBCW, their reach is now, I think, up to around 148,000 employees. So they've got significant reach, and across the region, there's 88 businesses that are undertaking that commitment to gender equality. The second pillar of investing in women is impact investing for women-led SMEs, and really trying to make sure that there is catalytic funding unleashed for these women-led SMEs and SMEs that are impacting on women's needs and being responsive to the needs of women. And then the third pillar, which I think is also really fascinating, and particularly in the region across Asia, is looking at gender norms. And it's a very important part of the conversation. It's probably, I think, one of the most complex parts, and we're really talking about generational change. And again, looking at what are our assumptions in society about the roles that men and women can play, and are we making sure that women have every opportunity to be supported? So I think it's a wonderful program. I really respect the people that are working on this. They've been doing it for a number of years. We are very fortunate that the Australian government, that we made this investment pre-COVID, because it's here now and they've got the relationships and they're embedded. And that means that we can lean into this, and it can be part of the COVID-19 recovery as well, working through all these pillars.
Mm-hmm. And that's fascinating. And so, yeah, it completely makes sense with everything that we've seen and everything that I want to cover today. You mentioned gender norms, and I hope that we'll have time to touch on that a bit later today. But I want to focus on impact investing and investing in women. You said those are our pillars of the work of Invest in Women initiative. And I think that investing in women could really, one, expand the market opportunities for women across the region, but also kickstart our economic recovery. So Nasrine, I want to ask you, from a financial point of view, what are some of the challenges and benefits of gender lens investing? Is it really profitable? And is diversity a concern for shareholders in Asia at the moment?
Sure. You know, we believe that diversity will improve with efforts from all stakeholders, employees, top management, the exchange, the regulator, the government, the NGOs, and us, of course, the shareholders. And we are willing to play our part. Most of institutional investors in the region are beyond the why diversity matters question. They understand the benefit of diversity, and they witness the progress in the region and worldwide. We want to convince them that we can move the lines in Hong Kong as well with engagement. So as investors, we can really play a role. The message I want to get across here is that it is about performance, and we know that diversity can improve performance. Then diversity should be a concern for all shareholders in Asia. In our group, we have money managers, we have asset managers, pension funds, hedge funds that joined us in that effort. And we meet and we talk, we openly exchange opinions, we share details from our recent engagement. We celebrate every new female appointment on a board of a company we engage with. And we encourage all investors to join us in that effort. In fact, the trend that we see is that not only shareholders are more and more engaging with their investor companies on that matter, but they are also more and more willing to use their voting rights, including voting against the management, for lack of diversity progress. It's a big trend in Hong Kong and in the region.
That's good to hear. I hope it continues in that trend. Julianne, from a government point of view, how are governments across the region building, or how can they build ecosystems that will incentivize the investors to support women-led initiatives, if at all?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a really clear role at the moment. And in this space, I think it's very interesting because two things seem to be true at the same time. That on the one hand, there's increasing evidence that is demonstrating that businesses that have more equal representation of men and women on their boards and in leadership outperform those that don't, and they're more profitable, and that's across sectors. So there's growing evidence base on that hand, which I think is really important. And then on the other hand, we know that women-led startups and women-owned, women-led SMEs in particular don't have access to capital. And I think that's the really interesting thing, is if you put those together, you know, that I imagine in 5 years that this may be solved, because people who are in venture capital and investment firms are very smart people, and they will put this evidence together. In the interim, you know, the Australian government, certainly through investing in women, is working to be catalytic in the market and to unleash and finance this sector that has a lack of access to capital and is underserved at the moment. And excitingly, through the early investments that have been done in the 3 countries, they've leveraged more than 5 times the amount that's been invested, and mobilised $275 million worth of capital for women SMEs and those that are impacting on and serving women's needs. So it's exciting. I think it's a new area. There's lots of partnerships happening here in Vietnam with an organisation called AVPN. There's a lot of great work that's been done. So we'll see where it develops. But at the moment, it's about the evidence base, it's about creating awareness, and it's about bringing people together to make sure that they partner for impact.
Thank you. I want to come back to the point that you made on gender norms. So as we've seen, there has been some progress in the last years and decades even, but there still seems to be this tension between tradition and change. And cultural and political barriers continue to restrict opportunities available to women, to me anyway. So Julianne, do you see resistance coming from policy and government circles in the region against the push for female empowerment? And if so, how do you reconcile these tensions going forward?
So no, I wouldn't categorise it as a tension on behalf of governments. I actually think almost the opposite, that increasingly governments understand the opportunity that's there, very much so. It doesn't make it easy by any means, but you know, for the almost 3 years that I've been in Vietnam and talking about gender, one of the statistics that I think has always stood out for me and that I've always referenced is from McKinsey, and it's from 2018, so a couple of years ago, but specific to Vietnam. And this research said that if Vietnam was able to economically empower and engage women more in the economy, the opportunity would be there for Vietnam to add $40 billion USD to its GDP every year from 2025. That's $40 billion more. That's the size of the opportunity that exists. I think that's incredible, and that kind of headline has always been a showstopper when talking, you know, with government, and it's governments around the world, you know, that this opportunity exists. McKinsey's coming out saying the opportunity globally for the COVID-19 recovery is 13 trillion. If we empower women economically and build back better, as you said at the start. So that's the headline. And I think governments around the world, no matter where they are thinking about the economy, thinking about how do we recover. To me, I think this is just so clear. The answer is in making sure that we build back with gender equality at the heart of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there's absolutely a business case for parity. So hopefully if people don't do the right thing because they want to do the right thing, they'll do it because of the business case.
Yeah.
Nasrine,
I might just add, sorry, can I jump in? One last thing I thought there. When you're talking about tensions, I do agree that I think some of the tensions come from the gender norm part, and that's that third pillar, investing in women, working on. And really this is a two-sided conversation, because it's not only talking about empowering women on the one hand, it is also then saying that we need to empower men to be able to make fulsome choices in the roles that they play, and that's in family life as well, that we need to challenge those old stereotypes that are long held about who has to be the breadwinner or, you know, lead the family in those kind of traditional roles. So there's always, in my mind, two parts to this conversation, and it's about providing gender equality not only to women but to men as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's very important, and yeah, thank you for this addition. Nasrine, well, actually, yeah, talking about female empowerment in the region, and this includes Australia, what do you think is something that's been missed by the current discussions, and are there things that you think policymakers are overlooking? And maybe empowering men is one of these things.
Sure. Look, speaking from my seat as a global investor based in Hong Kong, focusing on markets across Asia, and as the co-founder of the Board Diversity Hong Kong Investor Initiative, I would say that first, we need to fight the perception that we will achieve gender diversity without formal incentives, that if it is good, the market should do it by itself. We saw with Hong Kong statistics that it's not the case, but change takes time. Second, to go back to Julianne's point, there is the perception that we want gender diversity only because it's good to do. That this is rooted in a sense of doing something good for the world or good for equality, rather than something that is about performance. I think many discussions miss the performance point. Although it is obvious that if your customer base are women, if your employees are mostly female, and if you don't have a single woman on your board, there is probably a governance issue. We want quality boards that have the relevant skills. We want strong governance. And we know that adding qualified women as directors can improve that. We don't want the sister or the wife added, obviously. It's not a check the box exercise. It's really about improving governance. Third, I think what we miss often is that gender diversity improves all kinds of diversities in Asia. If I can share about our engagement with companies anecdotally, we often hear companies saying that they have a great board, a single gender board, that they are very proud of, with a long tenure, working very efficiently together. But they hear the need for better diversity. Then they explain to us that they have hard time finding the perfect female candidate for the board. And we're talking about companies with 100,000 employees. They have hard time to find a female internally. They also have hard time to find a female in the whole sector. So quite often in Asia, we see that they go to academia to find the perfect candidate. So when companies hear that they need more diversity, they review their board, they think pragmatically about how to improve it, but it really feels that choosing that first woman is a very high risk. That perfect woman should feel all the missing skills, have the great network which is needed. Really, I call it a unicorn, basically. So finally, when that woman is appointed to the board, she mathematically improves gender diversity, obviously. But most of the time, she improves skills diversity, experience diversity, age diversity, and even sometimes racial diversity here in the region. And finally, there is a last perception, I think, that we can talk about, is linked to just what I just said, the fact that it feels implementing any change is massive, that it's a all or nothing thing. So I really believe that it's the sum of efforts from all stakeholders which is needed, and everyone can be a part of that effort.
Great, thank you. And yeah, I was looking at the figures for in finance, and you probably know this better than I do, but the percentage of men and women entering the field is roughly equal. But then when you look at senior roles, it's all men, which is, yeah, definitely an issue, and a woman shouldn't be a unicorn for sure. I want to end, we don't have a lot of time, but I just want to end on a bit of a hopeful, positive note. You're both women in leadership positions in traditionally male-dominated industries. So I want to ask you what advice you would have to the next generation of women who are looking to make a change and maybe be part of the recovery efforts now and in the years to come. Whoever wants to start first can start.
Nasrine.
Yes, sure, I can start. Look, with COVID, it's a crisis for all of us, and we all have lived these challenging times. Some of us have been hit particularly hard. But in our engagement with investing companies, we see it as a moment of crisis. We see that many corporates are more willing to take advice, in fact. They are more willing to hear from and dialogue with shareholders on all kinds of issues. We really feel that corporates are under pressure. They have a renewed sense of urgency to bolster their businesses to weather the pandemic and related crises. They have a renewed sense of urgency to manage their team in a remote world. So as shareholders, we find it a very good time to engage on diversity. In fact, to engage on all ESG issues more broadly, which is really getting big with investors, but also with the younger generation. So I would say that you can play a role wherever you are. I felt this as an investor. I felt that I could play a role. But even if you're quite junior, you can play a role. You can start out by trying to find like-minded people in your firm, men or women, willing to work on diversity. You can reach out to NGOs and industry organizations. I have been myself involved with 100 Women in Finance, with the 30% clubs, as you mentioned earlier. So I would say start where you can, try to find like-minded people. And for less junior women, I would like to add a message, if I can. I would like to tell to female professionals in mid to top management stage to think about seeking a board seat and to get ready for it. In Hong Kong, we are waiting for the conclusion of a Hong Kong exchange consultation by year end, and this could be the end of single gender board in Hong Kong. So between the existing listed companies and the IPO pipeline, it means hundreds of seats opening. So I believe that I will end up that conversation on that positive note for Hong Kong and for the region. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Julianne?
Yeah, that is exciting to hear. Look, I think probably my advice wouldn't be just to women, but to women and men at all levels. Again, as Nasrine said, even junior officers starting out in your career. I think it's really important that people look around the rooms that we're in, and even the virtual rooms these days, and see if everyone looks like you and sounds like you and has the same experience as you and is bringing those opinions. Do something about it. So if you're senior, you absolutely have the levers to change that. But if you're junior, you can also pull back your seat and offer it to someone else, and you'll be known for that in your career. If you make an early commitment to diversity, to including and bringing forward other people's voices, you will absolutely be known for that. And then I think the other quick anecdote that I thought about when thinking of this, answering this, was when I was very junior, I went up to a very senior lady in my organisation. It took me a fair bit of courage to go up to her. I admired her career. She hadn't had children. She'd succeeded amazingly in the organisation. And I was talking to her about career aspirations, and I never forget, because on this afternoon she asked me, did I want to have a family? And I hadn't had children then, and I said yes, I wanted a career and I wanted to have children. And I'll never forget, because she said to me, okay, well, you can have both but not at the same time. And I was very upset at this, and I kind of took that away, and I kept thinking and turning it over because I did want to have both, and I did want to have both at the same time. I didn't want to have to wait. And so I guess now, having had 3 children and a young family, and also very committed to a career, my advice would be that you can have both, and you can have them at the same time, but it's not easy. You need to have conversations with your team of family around making decisions that support that, and everyone understands the priorities. And in my household, I'm not the only one with a career, so we make choices and balance that, and the children do as well. But I'm very much a hands-on parent. I'm very much committed to my career. You need to find a career that you're passionate about, and when you're passionate about your career, and if you want to have a family at the same time, you need to work hard at both, but you absolutely can do it. So that would be my advice.
Thank you. You mentioned courage, and I think, yeah, we have to be courageous, and it means having courageous conversations and questions and getting in the room, even though it feels very awkward sometimes, especially at a junior level. But yeah, thank you both for that insight. It's really, it gives me hope. I want to move to Hong Kong and get one of those seats on a board, which I probably can't have, but that's fine. This brings the session to a close, unfortunately. Thank you so much, both of you, for your insight and for today's conversation. We still obviously have so much to cover. The Asia Pacific is a vast and complex region, and there's many factors to take into consideration when we look at gender. So obviously we can't do all of that today, but I hope that today's conversation can be the start of a longer conversation. And speaking of which, this is when I have my exciting announcement. I'm delighted to announce that this year's Disruptive Asia edition will focus on women and girls. For those of you who don't know, Disruptive Asia is a thought leadership project launched in 2017, and it presents through long-form essays, new perspectives, and policy recommendations on how the current dynamics in Asia are impacting Australia's foreign policy, economy, and society. So Disruptive Asia Volume 5 sets out to examine how women and girls are actively changing these dynamics across Asia, and also how they're being impacted by them. If you enjoyed today's conversation, I think that you'll really like this publication. We'll explore some of the issues that we touched on today in more depth, including the benefits of parity, gearing the economy towards women, feminist foreign policy, and many more important issues. And we're also really excited that Nasrine can contribute to the publication with an essay of her own. So these essays will come out on our dedicated Disruptive Asia website from now to May 2022. So make sure that you keep an eye out for those, and you can visit our page using the QR code that we shared with you previously. So this brings today's session to an end. Please join me in thanking our 2 wonderful speakers, and a reminder that we will be streaming live all day. So I encourage you to join our next session, The Global Economy, starting in an hour. And in the meantime, make sure that you explore the animations and the pre-recorded content on our platform. Thank you, and see you in a moment.